A cowboy finds a chained wolf with her cub. What happened next? No one could believe. The morning sun was a brutal, unforgiving thing in the Arizona Territory. For Ezra Blackwood, it was just another day tracking stolen cattle. 3 days he'd been on the trail, his boots worn thin, his eyes scanning the endless horizon. He was a man carved from the desert itself, tough and quiet, with a Colt .45 on his hip that had spoken for him more times than he cared to count. He thought he'd seen every kind of trouble this land could cook up. He was wrong. It started with a sound, not the wind, not a coyote. This was different. A howl, low and full of a pain so deep it made the hairs on his arm stand up. His horse Thunder felt it too. The Mustang's ears flattened, a nervous snort escaping his lips. Something was deeply wrong out here in the canyons, where secrets lay buried under a blanket of red dust. Ezra kept moving, his gut twisting into a knot. He'd learned long ago to trust that feeling. It had kept him alive when other men ended up as stories told around a campfire. He saw tracks in the sand, and his blood ran cold. These weren't from cattle. They were boot prints, heavy, deliberate, and beside them, drag marks. Something had been pulled through this hellscape, fighting every inch of the way. The howling grew louder, echoing off the towering rock formations. It sounded like a ghost crying out from the very soul of the earth. Ezra dismounted, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. The cold steel felt familiar, reassuring. He moved forward on foot, silent as a predator, his eyes scanning the rocks for any sign of movement. He crept around a massive boulder, his heart pounding a steady rhythm against his ribs. And then he saw it. What he found in that hidden, rocky amphitheater would defy everything he knew about men and about the wild. In the center of a dusty clearing, a magnificent she-wolf was chained to an iron stake. The chain was thick, cruel, digging into the raw, bloody flesh of her neck. Her silver coat was matted with filth and dried blood. But it was her eyes that stopped him dead. Amber gold, and filled with an intelligence that was almost human. A blazing, desperate intelligence. She wasn't just a trapped animal. She was a prisoner. And she wasn't alone. Pressed against her side, shivering with weakness, was a tiny cub. It couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. Its small whimpers were almost lost in its mother's ragged breaths. The sight of them, so helpless, so brutalized, lit a fire in Ezra's chest. A cold, hard fury he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't the work of nature. This was the work of monsters. He scanned the scene. Empty whiskey bottles, the dead ashes of a campfire, and boot prints, many sets of them. This wasn't a one-time thing. These men had been coming back, again and again. For what? Some kind of sick entertainment? The mother wolf's eyes locked onto his. He expected to see fear or rage, but what he saw shattered him. It was a plea, a mother begging for the life of her child, and beneath it all, a tiny flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, he was different. He could see she wasn't sick, not with rabies or anything else. Her sickness was starvation, dehydration, and the slow, grinding pain of that chain. Her ribs stuck out like the bars of a cage. Yet even in her agony, her body was curled protectively around her cub. Her own suffering meant nothing next to the life of her child. It was a kind of strength Ezra had rarely seen, even in men. Just then, the silence was shattered by the sound of approaching horses. Instinct took over. Ezra melted back behind the rocks, his rifle at the ready. 3 riders appeared at the canyon entrance. Their laughter was loud and ugly, echoing off the stone walls. They dismounted with a swagger that spoke of men who took what they wanted and feared nothing. Ezra recognized the leader from a wanted poster. Jake Morrison, a cattle rustler, a thief, a man known for his casual cruelty. The other 2 were cut from the same rotten cloth. "Well, look who's still kicking," Morrison sneered, strolling toward the wolf. "Thought you'd have given up by now, girl." The wolf lunged, but the chain snapped her back, choking her. She fell to the ground, gasping, but her eyes never left them. A low growl rumbled in her chest, The cub huddled closer, a tiny ball of terror. Morrison just laughed. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a thick rope, a sickening grin spreading across his face. Ezra didn't need to ask what it was for. His finger tightened on the trigger. He knew what was coming. He'd seen this kind of casual evil before. To step in meant a fight to the death. But to do nothing, that was a different kind of death. He was outnumbered, 3-1. But Morrison and his men were arrogant, sloppy. They never expected anyone to be out here. They never expected anyone to care. That was going to be their last mistake. The mother wolf's breathing was getting weaker. Time was running out. Whatever sick game they were playing, the final act was about to begin. And as Morrison took a step toward the helpless cub, the wolf did something extraordinary. She turned her head, her gaze piercing the shadows where Ezra hid. She looked right at him. And in that moment, he saw more than a plea. He saw an understanding, a recognition, as if she knew he was there, as if she knew he was her only hope. The choice was made. Ezra stepped out from behind the rocks. His rifle was level, aimed squarely at Jake Morrison's heart. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the desert air like a razor. Step away from the wolf. The three men spun around, their eyes wide with shock. Hands flew toward their guns, then froze. They saw the look in Ezra's eyes, the look of a man who had already decided who was going to walk away from this. Morrison's face twisted into a snarl. "This ain't your concern, cowboy," he growled. "Ride on. Forget you saw anything." Ezra's reply was as cold as a grave. "I'm making it my concern." The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken violence. The only sound was the wind, the soft whimpering of the cub, and the ragged breathing of its mother. She watched, her intelligent eyes moving from Ezra to Morrison, as if she understood her life now rested on the outcome of this standoff. Morrison's men started to spread out, trying to flank him. A classic move. But Ezra wasn't a fool. He shifted his stance, keeping all three of them in his sight, the rifle never wavering from Morrison's chest. "You boys can ride out of here now," Ezra said, his voice deceptively calm. "Or you can try your luck against someone who shoots back." Morrison let out a harsh, barking laugh. "You'd risk your life for a mangy wolf? You're crazier than I thought, cowboy." But even as he spoke the words, his hand was moving, a blur of motion, flashing toward the gun on his hip. His men moved with him, a practiced, deadly dance. They were fast. Ezra was faster. The rifle cracked. Once. Twice. A third time. The shots echoed through the canyon like a clap of doom. When the smoke cleared, the only thing moving was the wind. Three men lay still on the red dust. The silence that fell was absolute. Ezra stood there for a long moment, the rifle still hot in his hands, his own breathing loud in his ears. Then he slowly, cautiously, approached the wolf. He wasn't sure what she would do. He'd just killed 3 men in front of her. He expected her to be terrified. But as he knelt down beside her, she remained perfectly calm. She watched him, her amber eyes holding a weary gratitude that felt startlingly human. She knew, somehow, she knew he had saved her. He examined the chain. It was held by a heavy padlock. He searched Morrison's body and found a ring of keys. The second one he tried slid into the lock. With a sharp click, the padlock sprang open. The heavy chain slithered to the ground. She was free. For a moment, she didn't move, as if she couldn't believe it was real. Then, she struggled to her feet, her legs trembling from weakness. Ezra backed away, giving her space. He expected her to bolt, to vanish into the rocks with her cub. But she didn't. Instead, she took a slow, painful step toward him. And another. And another. Until she was right in front of him. Then, the magnificent creature did something he would never forget. She gently pressed her muzzle against his outstretched hand. A silent thank you. A bond forged in violence and sealed with an impossible act of trust. The cub, seeing its mother's trust, trotted forward and sniffed at his boots, its tiny tail giving a tentative wag. In that moment, the weight of what he'd done, and what he still had to do, settled on Ezra's shoulders. He pulled out his canteen and poured water into his hat. The mother and cub drank greedily. He gave them the last of his jerky, and she took it from his hand with a gentleness that defied her wild nature, making sure her cub got the first bites. But simply freeing them wasn't enough. They were weak, starving. They wouldn't survive a day out here alone. Not with predators, both four-legged and two-legged, roaming these lands. The sun beat down, and Ezra knew he had to make another choice, a choice that might be even harder than pulling a trigger. As he watched them, he noticed the wolf wasn't just resting, she was studying him. Her eyes followed his every move, not with fear, but with an unnerving curiosity. It was as if she was trying to figure him out, to understand the man who had appeared out of nowhere and saved her. The cub, feeling safer now, began to play, pouncing on its own shadow, a spark of life refusing to be extinguished. Ezra turned his attention back to the dead men. There had to be a reason for this level of cruelty. He searched Morrison's saddlebags, and what he found turned the whole situation on its head. This was much bigger than he thought. It wasn't just random torture. Among Morrison's things was a leather-bound journal. The entries, written in a crude scrawl, described wolf behavior, tracking techniques, and the prices certain buyers would pay for specific types of wolves. This hadn't been a game. It was a business. A sick, twisted business. He found letters, too. Correspondence with men whose names he didn't know, but whose reputations were whispered in the darkest corners of the frontier. These weren't just outlaws, they were sophisticated criminals who dealt in rare and exotic animals for rich collectors. This mother wolf and her cub were meant to be sold into a lifetime of captivity. A fate, in some ways, worse than death. Morrison and his crew weren't just rustlers. They were part of a network. A trafficking ring that stretched across the territory. And as Ezra processed this, the wolf padded over to him. She dropped something at his feet. It was a piece of fabric, torn, dirty, but unmistakably from a woman's dress. A fine dress, not the kind of rough cloth a homesteader's wife would wear. The tear was fresh. A chill went down Ezra's spine. The wolf was trying to tell him something. Something important. There had been another victim. A human victim. And she might have been here very recently. Suddenly, his horse Thunder let out a sharp, agitated snort. The Mustang's ears were swiveling, his eyes fixed on the canyon entrance. Ezra trusted his horse's instincts more than he trusted most men. He followed Thunder's gaze and saw it. A plume of dust on the horizon. Riders. 4, maybe 5 of them, moving fast. Were they more of Morrison's gang, coming to see what was taking so long? The wolf saw them too. Her body went tense. She could run now. She was free. But she didn't. In another unbelievable display of trust, she looked at Ezra, as if waiting for his command. Then she did something that defied all logic. She moved to stand between him and the canyon entrance, a low growl rumbling in her chest. She was standing guard, protecting him. This wild creature he'd met only hours ago was ready to defend him with her life. Ezra's heart hammered in his chest. He quickly stuffed Morrison's journal and the letters into his own saddlebag. He chambered a round in his rifle. The approaching riders were close now. He could see they weren't riding like outlaws. They rode in a disciplined formation. He could just make out the glint of metal on their chests. Badges. Territorial marshals. Relief washed over him, but it was quickly replaced by a new kind of tension. He had 3 dead bodies on his hands. He'd have to explain what happened here. And he'd have to explain the wolf. The leader of the posse was a man Ezra recognized. Marshal Thomas Hartwell. A hard but fair man, with a reputation for being unshakable. Hartwell swung down from his horse, his eyes taking in the entire scene in a single sweeping glance. The bodies, the broken chain, the wolf and her cub, and finally, Ezra himself. "Ezra Blackwood," Hartwell said, his voice calm and steady. "Looks like you've had a busy morning." Ezra nodded. "Marshal. These men were torturing this wolf and her cub. They drew on me first." Hartwell walked over to the bodies. "Jake Morrison," he said, nudging the gang leader with his boot. "Been tracking him for months. He and his crew were suspected in a dozen disappearances, livestock and people. He looked over at the wolf, who was watching the lawmen with an unnerving calm. Never figured him for this, though. One of his deputies shouted from near the campfire. "Marshal, you better see this." Hidden under a pile of rocks, they found them. Cages. Dozens of them, of all shapes and sizes. This wasn't just about one wolf. This had been a full-scale operation, running for who knows how long. But the strangest thing was the wolf herself. She showed no fear of the marshals. One of the deputies knelt down, and she actually patted over and sniffed the badge on his chest. "Well, I'll be," the deputy muttered. "She acts more like a trained dog than a wolf." Ezra didn't know how to explain it. The connection he felt with this animal went beyond anything he'd ever known. It felt like something out of an old legend. As the marshals searched the camp, they found a hidden compartment in Morrison's wagon. It was full of records, lists of animals captured, and something else. References to human victims, people who had stumbled onto their operation and simply vanished. The true horror of what was happening in this canyon was just beginning to surface. The sun started to dip low, painting the rocks in shades of orange and purple. The situation was getting more complicated by the minute. Marshal Hartwell came over to Ezra, a look of deep confusion on his face. "Blackwood," he said, "I've heard stories about you, but I've never heard anything like this. This animal—" He was cut off by another shout, this one from a deputy who had been exploring a dark cleft in the canyon wall. "Marshal! Over here! You're not going to believe this." What the deputy had found changed everything. It wasn't just a camp. It was a prison. Deep inside a natural cave, they found crude cells carved out of the rock. They were empty now, but the signs of recent occupation were everywhere, and scattered on the floor of one cell were personal belongings, a hairbrush, a worn book, and the rest of the fine dress that the torn piece of fabric had come from. This wasn't just an animal trafficking ring. Morrison had been dealing in human lives as well. Ezra felt a wave of nausea. His simple act of mercy had uncovered a den of pure evil. An operation so vast and so vile it was hard to comprehend. As night fell, Marshal Hartwell made a call. They weren't leaving. They would camp here and conduct a full search of the caves at first light. He looked at the wolf, who had settled down by the fire with her cub, her eyes still watching everything. "There's something more to this," Hartwell said quietly to Ezra, "and I think she's the key." Later that night, as the deputies slept, Hartwell and Ezra sat by the fire. The wolf, who they'd started calling Luna, lay nearby, watching them with those intelligent eyes. "I've been a lawman for over 20 years, Hartwell said, his voice a low whisper. "I've seen things that would make a sane man's blood run cold. But I have never ever seen an animal act like that. It's like she understands us." As if on cue, Luna lifted her head and looked directly at the marshal. Hartwell stared back, his expression shifting from curiosity to outright awe. "See?" he whispered. "It's uncanny." Just then, the cub, who had been sniffing around the edge of the camp, let out a soft whimper. It was pawing at something buried in the sand near the mouth of the cave. Ezra walked over to see what it had found. Sticking out of the sand was the corner of a leather-bound book. He carefully dug it out. It was a diary. He opened it by the firelight, the pages filled with elegant, flowing handwriting. The story it told made the dark canyon feel 10 times colder. The diary belonged to a young woman named Catherine Rosewood, an heiress from the East traveling to California to meet her fiancé. 3 months ago, her stagecoach had been attacked by Morrison's gang. She had been taken captive, but her story wasn't just about her own suffering. It was about her fellow prisoner, a magnificent she-wolf who had been captured just before she was. The wolf, Luna, had become her only friend, her only source of comfort in that dark, terrifying place. "She watches me with such intelligent eyes," Catherine wrote. "Sometimes I feel like she understands every word I say. In this place of despair, she is my anchor." The diary described an impossible friendship. Luna would share her meager scraps of food with Catherine. She would press against the bars of Catherine's cell on cold nights to keep her warm. In turn, Catherine had talked to her for hours every day, teaching the wolf words, sharing her memories, her hopes, her fears. Morrison had planned to sell them both. Catherine into a life of slavery in the lawless territories, and Luna to a private zoo owned by a depraved collector. The last few pages described a desperate escape. A rival gang had attacked Morrison's camp. In the chaos, Catherine had managed to get free. She tried to free Luna too, but there was a complication. Luna had just given birth to her cub. She would not leave her baby. Catherine, heartbroken, was forced to flee alone, promising she would come back with help. The last entry was dated 2 weeks ago. "I will not abandon her," she had written. "I will be back for my friend." Hartwell's face was grim. 2 weeks. If she escaped into the desert with nothing, her chances of survival were almost zero. Why hasn't anyone heard from her? As if in answer, one of the deputies found something else in the cave. A small pile of Catherine's belongings, hidden in a deep alcove. Among them was a silver locket. Ezra opened it. Inside was a miniature portrait of a beautiful young woman with sharp, intelligent eyes. Eyes that were hauntingly familiar. They were the same amber gold as Luna's. When Luna saw the locket, she began to whimper, pawing at the object, her distress plain for all to see. The bond described in the diary was real. It was deeper and more powerful than any of them could have imagined. They now understood that Morrison's operation was far more sinister than they had thought. He wasn't just an outlaw. He was a monster, a purveyor of misery, backed by powerful, wealthy men who bought and sold lives like cattle. As the first light of dawn began to break, Luna's behavior changed. She became restless, agitated. She kept pacing to the mouth of the cave, whining, then looking back at Ezra and the marshals. It was more than just distress. It was urgency. She was trying to tell them something else. Trusting the animal that had already proven her incredible intelligence, Ezra followed her to the cave entrance. He held up a lantern, peering into the darkness. And that's when he heard it. Faint, but unmistakable. The sound of a human voice, echoing from deep within the earth. She wasn't dead. She was still here. The realization hit them like a physical blow. She never escaped. Hartwell breathed, his face a mask of horror. She must have tried, got lost in the cave system, or Morrison caught her and threw her in a deeper hole. Instantly, the camp was a flurry of motion. Hartwell organized a search party. Ezra, with his tracking skills, would lead. And at the front of the group, without any command, was Luna. Her body was taut, her ears pricked forward, guiding them into the suffocating darkness of the caves. She knew where she was going. She was leading them to her friend. They descended into the earth, deeper than they thought the caves went. The air grew thin and cold. They navigated a maze of tight passages and dark chambers. Finally, Luna stopped in front of a wall of rock that looked solid, but she began pawing at it, whining with an intensity that was almost frantic. Ezra examined the wall. It was a cleverly disguised door, a slab of rock set on a crude hinge. Behind it, they found another cell. And in that cell, lying on the cold stone floor, was a figure. Barely alive, but still breathing. It was Catherine Rosewood. Her ordeal had left her skeletal, weak, but the fire in her eyes still burned. When she saw Luna, a tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. "Luna," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "You came back for me." The reunion was one of the most powerful things Ezra had ever witnessed. Luna pressed against the bars, whimpering, licking Catherine's outstretched fingers. The love between the woman and the wolf was a tangible thing, a light in that terrible darkness. They freed her, and as they carried her out into the sunlight, Catherine's story filled in the final, horrifying pieces of the puzzle. She had tried to escape, but Morrison's men had caught her and left her in that deep cell to die. For 2 weeks, she had survived on nothing but a trickle of water seeping through the rock. But she had never given up hope, because she knew Luna would not abandon her. As they emerged into the canyon, Catherine's first question was about the cub. The reunion of the 3 of them, woman, wolf, and cub, was a testament to a bond that defied all explanation. In the days that followed, The story of Catherine and Luna spread like wildfire across the territory. Catherine's family was one of the wealthiest in the country, and they brought their full power to bear. The investigation into Morrison's network became a federal matter. Ezra, whose frontier skills and first-hand knowledge were invaluable, accepted Marshal Hartwell's offer to become a deputy marshal and lead the investigation. His life as a solitary cowboy was over. He had found a new purpose. Catherine refused to be separated from her saviors. Using her family's resources, she established a sanctuary for rescued animals, the first of its kind. Luna and her cub, now named Apollo, would live with her, not as pets, but as family. The bond they shared was unbreakable. Luna, with her incredible intelligence, helped Catherine heal from her trauma in a way no human ever could. The story of the cowboy, the heiress, and the wolf became a legend. A story of how courage and compassion could be found in the most unlikely of places. It showed that the line between human and animal was not as clear as people thought, and that the bonds of friendship could be strong enough to overcome even the purest evil. Ezra went on to dismantle Morrison's entire trafficking ring, bringing dozens of powerful men to justice and saving countless lives, both human and animal. Catherine became a fierce advocate for justice, her voice carrying the weight of her incredible story. And Luna, the wolf who understood more than any animal should, became a symbol of hope. A reminder that even in the darkest of canyons, a light can shine. And sometimes, the most loyal heart beats within the chest of a wild creature. What do you think would have happened if Ezra had just ridden away? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales from the edge of the map.